today is probably about the 5th or 6th of these super group sessions that we've run. And we're looking at an area that we haven't discussed in these before, and that's crewing. And crewing is just so vital, you know, like especially like on the longer multi-days. It almost, ultra running almost becomes a team event. And if you've got a really good team, it can absolutely totally be the difference between, well, finishing an event like that or doing really well and or not completing it. Can make such a difference. And a lot of that is obviously there's the physical stuff in terms of assisting the runner, but a lot of it is mental support and helping runners get through these things mentally. And I've been there many numbers of times where crews had to pick me up and point me in the right direction. And luckily, Liz Bennett, who's joining us, has been there on 3 or 4 of those occasions. And Liz is absolutely my #1 go-to in terms of selection of crew. She's in Canberra, which is really convenient if you ever want to go and run coast to Kosciuszko. So she's done that twice for me. And in fact, she's crewed 9 consecutive coast to Kosciuszko, which is just amazing. She's crewed for me twice. She crewed for Sean Kessler, and I guess the main runner she's crewed for has been Pam Muston. How many times have you crewed for Pam, Liz?
I've crewed for Pam 3 or 4 times, and I've crewed for Kerry Bremner. Kerry
Bremner as well. Mm. Yeah. As well as that, Liz has crewed for Mick Thwaites twice at 48-hour events, including when he ran the 3rd furthest distance by an Australian, just behind Martin Fryer and Yanis Kouros in Canberra a few years ago. And I think that was the furthest 48 ever run on Australian soil, which was amazing. And she's crewed on numerous other events as well, and not just running. So she crewed for Kevin Cassidy. I don't know if you all know Kevin or know of Kevin, but Kevin is the ex-president of Aura and was very heavily involved with Aura in the 1980s and 1990s. But most recently, he was the ultra writer in the Run for Your Life magazine, which is no longer there. But yeah, Kevin swam the English Channel. So we've never really spoken about that, Liz. That would have been quite an experience.
Yeah, I didn't actually crew for him at the English Channel. It was after he came back, and it was another endurance swim, but in Australia.
Oh, right, okay.
So I crewed for him in the kayak, and yeah, like it was an amazing experience, and particularly compared to crewing a runner, because they're just so different from each other. None the least of which is that the swimmer can't hear you.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's sort of hand signals and other sort of crazy stuff, but it was an amazing experience anyway.
Great. Liz is also a terrific runner herself. In fact, she ran for Australia at World Mountain Running Championships, and is still running regularly, which is absolutely terrific. And I think, you know, we, as part of the core sessions, we have a full 1-hour session on crewing. And one of the things that I do advise the guys is, when you're choosing your crew, if you can find another ultra runner, that's probably a good start. And I think that's certainly the case with Liz. So maybe we start there, Liz.
Okay.
Tell us about a runner choosing crew, but maybe even more importantly, crew choosing the runner?
So it's quite interesting in that when you first asked me if I would like to come along and have a chat with your group, I thought, you know, what would I say, you know? But then it didn't take me long after I asked myself that question that I thought, in actual fact, crewing is essentially all about the mental side of it. In that even when you're thinking that all you're doing is servicing the physical needs of the runner, like the food and the watering and the blisters and the changing of clothes as the temperature increases and decreases and all the rest of it, what you're essentially doing is keeping your runner as comfortable as possible physically so that they can keep their head in the game. And that as soon as the physical discomfort starts to rise up, the mental resilience starts to come down. And so the two are just intrinsically related. And so that made me think a bit differently about what potentially I could contribute to tonight. And I wrote sort of like maybe 4 main things that I thought it would be good to cover, but it's not about me, it's about you guys, and it's about what you want. And so I'm completely happy for people to sort of like put their hand up, ask questions, send us off on a different direction. But certainly in terms of how things are going to go from the outset between a runner and their crew has a lot to do with who their crew is and how the crew's been selected. So for some people, for example, the natural choice is their partner in life, you know, or they're a family member. And for some people that works really, really well. And for other people, that's a recipe for disaster because they're so much more invested if they're a partner in life as well as somebody who's supporting you. And I've seen it work really well and I've seen it work really badly. Or in other words, not work. And I think that that's worth people thinking about and to think about how as a runner, you think you're going to go with your partner, if it's your partner you've chosen to crew for you, if and when things start to get hard for you and hard for them, and what that's going to mean not just for the race, but also for your relationship, both during the event and also afterwards. Because while we would all like to say, whatever happens on the track or whatever happens on the trail stays on the trail, I think that's a lot harder to achieve when you've chosen as your crew the person who, you know, you then go home with at the end of the event. So that's one part of it. But then there's another couple of ways in which you can choose crew which also have positives and negatives. So sometimes other runners are really good choices because they have a runner mentality. So they kind of get who you are intrinsically and why you're doing what you're doing. But I have seen some runners as crew be quite self-interested in the crew role for themselves rather than for the runner. And there was a classic case for me that I observed from the outside in a year that I didn't crew one of the people who I would regularly crew, and they got somebody else to crew for them. And that person was using the crew experience as a recce for their own intentions to run Coast to Kosciuszko the following year. And was essentially not focused on the runner at all for the entire 240 kilometres, was just thinking about how they thought they would approach that bit of the course the next year and what kind of pace they would like to be on after, you know, sort of 24 hours, etc. And it didn't work very well for either of them. So I think that if people are going to choose other runners, then there's a really important conversation to be had beforehand about, you know, what that other person's motivation is for doing the crewing. You know, that sure, being a recce is okay if it's sort of secondary, but it's really important for crew just to be completely focused on the runner. It is so never about the crew person or people, it's about the runner. Other scenarios I've seen is where somebody crews for somebody because they owe them, that they've crewed them at some point in time, and so they think it's kind of their turn to crew, and yet putting the shoe on the other foot may or may not work that well. And so again, there's a conversation to be had there about, well, I'm not you and you're not me. And so what's that going to look like for us when we've got different roles? And then lastly, I would say, and sometimes this can work out exceptionally well, as it was with you and I, Rob, it's where you have as your crew someone who's crazy enough to do it, or who happens to be available, or who has said, yes, I'll be in the same place at the same time, but you may not even know each other. And sometimes that works out brilliantly well, and sometimes it doesn't. And those scenarios are completely unpredictable. But I guess my point in covering off on those sort of 4 different ways in which you may come to be matched up with particular crew, it's about, regardless of those circumstances and how you come to have as your crew, who you have as your crew, it's very important to have some upfront conversations about what your expectations are of a crew person, and are they in line with what the crew person thinks they're there to do, and to bring that back essentially to, it's not just about food and drink and changing band-aids and getting sweaty, sticky, revolting clothes off and warm, snug beanies and gloves and stuff on when it gets cold, but it's also about how's the person's mood going as you go along, because it's such a fickle state, and it can change so rapidly. So yeah, I mean, I think that the role of the crew is incredibly important in terms of a runner's mental state. And just as a hands up, I mean, I've been with my partner for over 40 years, and I know that it would never work for us for him to crew me. He would let me just soften out at any tick of the clock, and it wouldn't work. It'd be like, why are you doing this? Like, why don't we just go to the Hyatt and have dinner? You know. So you know, it's different people suit different people in terms of their crew, but I certainly know for me that partners are not a good option. Yeah. There's other stuff that I had, you know, have sort of thought that it'd be good to touch on, but it might be good to break it into sections and maybe see if people have got questions or comments on crew selection to begin with.
Yeah. Does anybody have a question there? There's Nick.
Yeah, I was just, how do you go about asking people to be a crew? Because like if people have offered, I've gone, oh yeah, that'd be good, but I just feel bad asking anyone to sort of sacrifice their time like that.
Yeah, I think that that's a real issue for a lot of us, and yet for many people who get asked to be crew, they're actually really flattered to be asked. So I wouldn't hold back, but I would start from a premise of, you know, people are busy, they've got families and all the rest of it, and so the answer is more likely than not to be no. But you know, in my experience, I think I've rarely turned down an invitation to crew, and when I have, it's been for really specific reasons. On one occasion, or maybe 2 occasions, I've turned it down because I've been injured. So like seriously injured, I've had stress fractures, and I've thought, I can't pace with my foot in a boot. You know, I'd be doing them a disservice rather than a service. And there's a couple of other times where I've just had family stuff on that has made it untenable. But I think you'd be surprised, Nick. I think you'd be surprised that many people would be flattered.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right, Liz. You know, I've had situations where I thought I'd do an ultra without crew, and you know, I've ended up with 5 people putting their hands up, and I haven't even asked. You know, so you'll find there are
Like
actually
unreasonable even signed up.
I just want to say that I was flattered by my mate Big Kev asking me.
Fantastic, Gary.
No, that's good. No, thanks for all that advice. It'll be the first time that I've actually been involved with something like this. I've sort of been with Big Kev on a few different running events where I've just sort of helped out a little bit at Tower Reading and at Wembley as well in the backyards. So this will be over however many days. But I think we've got the vehicle that is as equipped as possible, and yeah, I'm sort of in Kev's hands. But yeah, just super excited to be involved, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. I think, and what I say to everybody in those 1 hour sessions is, sometimes you need to really have a strong, every time you have to have a strong conversation with the crew before the event, and it's a really difficult one to have, but basically you need to just be upfront and say, for the next 4 days, this is all about me, not about you. You need to be totally selfless, and that will hopefully stop things like crew going off and doing sightseeing or thinking that a coffee is more important than getting to the aid station and stuff. Have you seen a bit of that, Liz?
Yeah, and it's really interesting at the beginning of really big events where everybody's tapered off, including the crew. And so, they're all full of carbs and, full of energy. And it can be quite a lot of excitement, but they're kind of having the party too early. And I often say to people, like, even in terms of, the exchanges you have with people and how humorous you are, what's funny at 20 Ks, not funny at 80. So, like, don't even start. And also as a way of conserving energy, both for the runner and also the crew. It's that stuff about, you want to start how you want to finish. And if you burn all your energy, including all that excitable hyper stuff early on, even as a crew member, and you're not out there slogging out every single kilometre that your runner's slogging out, you'll slump. You'll just die in the ass, to use a really high-tech expression. And if you don't look after yourself, then you can't look after your runner. And so there's a lot to be said for reining yourself in pretty early on as well.
So in saying that, then is it the case that being in the key support person and support vehicle is to maybe just concentrate on being that support person and vehicle rather than actually doing any running as well? Or can it do a little bit of both? Or you think that that job's just for another support person in that party rather than you can't sort of double up doing that?
I think that really depends on both the runner and the crew person and the relationship that you've already got. So I've done both. Like at Coast to Kosci, there's been times where I've just crewed, and there's been times when I've run over 80K as a pacer, at the same time as feeding, watering, doing blisters, cleaning up vomit, doing contingency planning, trying to find alternative vehicles when something went wrong with the vehicle that we had and all that kind of stuff. But I think that if you're going to do both, that's normally in the domain of somebody who's a training partner. So you sort of know each other really, really well in terms of running alongside each other as well as crewing. But all of this, it's not a precise science. It's very variable. But that's certainly been my experience. The times at which I've combined the two the best has been when I've been crewing for someone who I also train with.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, Gazza, you ain't running, Gazza. You're looking after me. No running, Gary. No running. I'm saying it right now. No running for you, Gary.
Rightio, no worries. I just noticed that Musa, Brett Morris, is next to you there. That's really quite scary. I didn't realise he's that scary looking bloke these days. But anyway, I'll go back to the topic. I apologise for deviating there.
I think one of the things with being a pacer and crew too is that if you're going to be a pacer, it's really important to remember that it's not your race, it's your runner's race. And so you need to go at their pace. And I've certainly had experiences where, you know, I've gone a little bit too quick and, you know, my runners said, I can't do that, you know, like I need to walk a bit. But then on the other hand, the year that I crewed for Sean at Kosciuszko, he just had ants in his pants and we were going down Threadbow River and he's running sub 5 minute Ks and I'm thinking, Jesus, hold on a minute, mate. I haven't run 5 minute Ks for 12 months. And I think what that says is that part of the conversation that you need to have with your runner, if you think you're going to pace them, is what's your level of fitness? Is your level of fitness going to be across the breadth of theirs? Like, are you going to be able to run quick when they want to run quick? And are you okay to walk for hours and hours and hours if they have to walk for hours and hours and hours? So, you know, there's a lot of really important sort of micro conversations within the whole gamut of what you might talk about prior to having someone crew for you.
What about when you have multiple crew, Liz, and the relationships between the different crew members?
Yeah, so certainly with some of the big events like Kosciuszko and the 48 hours that I've crewed for Mick, we've sort of crewed in shifts because, you know, you can't stay up for 48 hours and service the runner the way you need to, in that, you know, it's to be expected that the runner just goes into a state of fatigue where at various points they're just delirious and they will just, you know, take what you give them, or if you tell them it's time to get changed into something, they'll just stand there and let you change them, you know, but you have to be on the ball. So yes, more conversations in advance and some really careful scheduling around, you know, like no one can stay up for over 12 hours and still, you can be awake, but you're not as motivated and not on the ball. So to do your scheduling around when are the natural biorhythms for people going to slump, and let's preempt that so that they're not tired before you pull them out and put your new people in. And that's been really important in events like Kosciuszko, for instance, where we've done a crew changeover and you are in the middle of nowhere. And the crew who's tired and coming out then has to drive, you know, 50, 60 or whatever kilometres on a very icy, windy, narrow road back to the cabin to get 2 or 3 hours kip before they come back again. And so there's a real safety issue in there as well. So I think it's about scheduling in advance and remembering at the time, even if you don't feel like stepping in or stepping out, this is what we agreed on, and we agreed on it because this is part of the safety plan. And it's not about us being in a particular mood at the time or not. It's that this is what we committed to doing so that everybody's safe.
Yeah, Liz, for Delirium, you know, being a 200 miler, you know, I've only got Gary, which is probably more than enough, but would you recommend, you'd probably recommend 2 or 3 crew, I suppose, in the ideal world, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, I've done it by myself. When I crewed for Mick, for instance, on the 48 hour, his wife and his young daughter were there, but his daughter at the time was 11. And so they were there for the daytime and then went off and went back to the hotel and had a sleep. And so there was probably, I mean, both nights I was there by myself and I'd been there all day as well. And we just agreed, this is between Mick and I, that I would set up on the table all of the stuff that he would need for maybe, you know, 10 or 20 laps of the track. And I would set an alarm, but I just needed to have 20 or 30 minutes sleep just to revive myself and then get through. And, you know, 20 or 30 minutes you can do quite well on, you know, but you need to be able to know that you can have it. And I think there's a psychological element to knowing that you can have that if you need to have it. And that can help you keep going for longer than what you would think you could do anyway. But yeah, I think particularly when you're traveling places and people are driving, it's way more important to have, you know, scheduled changeovers of crew.
And if you don't have that luxury, Kev, you know, think about giving the crew additional rest, you know, like saying, don't worry about the next aid station, I'll take care of the next 40K by myself. You know, you go and find yourself somewhere to sleep for the next 4 or 5 hours, you know.
Yeah.
Just so
yeah, that's what I was thinking, because it's obviously, you know, you're looking at 20, 30, 40Ks between aid stations. So I could just tell Gary, disappear. It's going to take me 2 hours to get to the next aid station, then 2 hours to get to the next one. So I'll see in 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Slow down, Kev.
All right. Slow down. I'll see in 6 to 8 hours.
And I've certainly done that when I've crewed for Pam, because, you know, the other thing is some runners like being alone and other people don't. But, you know, certainly when I've crewed for Pam, and I've crewed for her a lot, there's been times where she's happy to be by herself for 4 or 5 hours, and I'll just fill up a bum bag or a camelback for her with, you know, snacks and fluid and everything, and give her the phone and say, I'll see you in 2 or 3 hours. You ring me if the wheels fall off, and I will, you know, be there as soon as I can. So, you know, you can put in place those things as well. And then I think you both know that you've got a plan B.
Talking about the wheels falling off.
Yeah.
How do you manage those situations?
So I think there's a difference between it starting to get really, really hard and the wheels completely falling off. And I was thinking about this before tonight, and, you know, you would know, Rob, and I was kind of interested to hear the time, Lucy's comments when you had her on, when she was crewing for George at Coast to Cosy, and the sorts of things that help particular runners if things are starting to get hard. So I thought I'd start there with things that are getting hard, and then move into what happens when the wheels really do fall off. And, you know, Lucy had some really good sort of funny stories about, you know, George just wanted her to sing. Well, if you want me to crew for you, I won't be singing, just saying. But for some people, that works really well. For me, and the various runners that I've crewed for, I've found that other sorts of things help. So Pam, for instance, I can always tell when she's really hitting a hard spot, because she'll say to me, tell me a story. Tell me a story. And she doesn't want to know anything about running. It'll be, you've got a really interesting job. Tell me about your work. Or just tell me about a time that you can remember from when you were a kid. So Pam's, you know, trigger or cue to me that things are getting really hard and that she needs to go to a different place of being distracted is when she'll say, tell me a story. But then there's other runners, and Mick is probably a good example, and probably you too, Rob. You both go quiet. And so I go quiet because, you know, you don't need to be talking. I mean, the best crew are the people who just stay alongside you quietly and just take the cues from you. If you want to talk, talk. If you don't want to talk, don't talk. And my internal motto is, if you don't talk, you can't say anything wrong. If you do talk, you really, really can say something wrong. So, and then there's other sort of little anecdotes, and Pam will often come back to this one with me because I sort of said it to her the very first time I ever crewed for her, and I think I've said it to her at some point in every single other event I've crewed for her in, where she's found it really hard and she's felt like she's not coping and she's just on the brink of saying, I'm done, I just want to give this away. And I've said to her, you know, I remember, and I'm not going to give you a gory labour story, but when I was in labour with my first child, I had a terrible labour and it was very, very long. And there was one point where I said to the midwife, I just can't do this anymore. I'm just not coping. And she said, but you are coping. And I've recounted this story to Pam many, many times in ultras. And I've said to her, you are coping. You're getting there. You're putting one foot in front of the other. Every step you take is a step you don't have to take again. You're getting there. And so there's a whole lot of, they seem little and trite when you're not in that situation, but when you are in that situation, they buy you 5 minutes. And sometimes that's all you need to get over that peak hump, and then you're at a different place. So I think that's for when it gets hard. For when the wheels really fall off, I've only had that happen a couple of times. And the one time that it happens that really sticks with me again, I was crewing for Pam at Kosciuszko, and she had done, we were coming into Jindabyne, so I don't know what she'd run, maybe 180k,
Yeah.
and it was pitch dark, and she fell and she hit her head on the road. And when she got up, she was very wobbly. She was all over the place. She kept falling over, but like blacking out, not just sort of tripping, but, and I didn't really know what to do, and we were by ourselves. And I called the race medic, and he came and sort of did a very cursory sort of checking out of her. And then abdicated responsibility. And this is not to be critical of him, because he had a fair point in that he said, when somebody has an episode where they may or may not have lost consciousness, the really important thing is, what are they normally like and what are they like now? And, you know, what's the difference? And you probably know that better than me. And he said to me, well, you know her better than me. You make the call as to whether or not to pull her out or to let her keep going. And we persevered for a while, but she got to the point where she was stumbling and falling, and I didn't know whether she was falling or passing out or a mix, quite a lot, but over the next sort of 5 or 10K. And I called her husband and other people who were on the crew and said, what do you think I should do? Do you think I should pull her? And everybody was saying, well, you know, we know what a, you know, tough person she is and just how mortified she would be to DNF in this, and you'll be incurring the wrath if you do. But at the end of the day, I thought, this is unsafe. I just have to pull her out. And the only way I could justify it to her and to myself at the time was to say, if you keep passing out and keep falling over as you are at the moment, and you have been for the last 10 minutes or 10K, sorry, the last 10K, you're going to miss the next cutoff anyway. And so let's call it now while it's easy to do, because we weren't that far from Jindabyne and we could get back, and it was the, you know, early hours of the morning. She was really unhappy about it and really unhappy with me. And you know, that's that whole thing about, you know, how deep's your friendship and, you know, how are we going to go with this after this event. But ultimately I felt vindicated, because for 3 to 6 months after that event, Pam continued, and I, you know, she's disclosed this to lots of people, so I feel confident enough disclosing it. She had many episodes of just randomly passing out. When she wasn't even exerting herself. So she had a period when she was just getting something out of the fridge and she passed out and crashed into a shelf in the fridge. There was another time when she was just outside and she was just, you know, cleaning out some gutters and doing some work on the windows at her house, and she fell off the ladder because she just passed out. And the doctors couldn't really say why it was happening, but none of this had happened before Kosciuszko and her falling and hitting her head on the road. So I think that when the wheels really fall off, the crew people, because the runner's not really as present as they can be because they're fatigued, crew have to be prepared to bite the bullet and make some hard decisions. And there was a long time there where I really didn't know if I'd made the right decision. And Pam and I were pretty quiet with each other for, you know, several weeks after that Kosciuszko. But later, when she shared with me that, you know, she'd continued to have these episodes, she also said to me, you know, as much as I hated it, it was the right decision to make. So, you know, at the end of the day, there's always going to be another race. But there are certain things where you go past the point of being tough and toughing out an event, and you're in the territory of risking life, and it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it now.
I'm crewing for Darlene Dale for Delirious West and pacing for her. And I've never paced before, so it's going to be quite an interesting adventure, I'm sure. But I'm just wondering at what point, when they start getting quite delirious and not really listening to you, how do you manage that situation to get them on the road to continue to go? Or, you know, at what stage do you actually think you should pull a pin if it's just a bit of being a bit delirious and a bit of not wanting to listen to what you're saying?
I think that delirium normally comes from two things. One is like excessive fatigue, and that's as much about being awake for an exceptional number of hours as it is about the exertion. And the other one is about just getting more and more depleted in terms of your food intake. So if someone's starting to get a bit delirious, I would normally just say, just take 15, 20 minutes out. It's not going to make that much difference to the overall result. And ultimately, it might make the difference between finishing or not. But if you can get someone to sit down and put their legs up and have a 10 or 15 minute kip and then get some carbohydrate into them, they can be a different person in 20, 25 minutes. One thing I would say about that is that with people who are really fastidious about numbers, and Mick is one of these people, he would say, okay, so after 12 hours, you can let me have 15 minutes sleep and that's it. But if you're going to do that, then, you know, I would wake him at 13 minutes because, you know, no one wakes up and gets on their feet and is joyous to see your smiley face saying, come on, let's go. But, you know that it really is important to them because their psychology is linked into the numbers to adjust around the numbers. But certainly having a little kip and some food while they're sitting versus, you know, on the go can make a, you know, completely change that delirious state.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question?
No, I was just going to say to Natalie, I know Darlene doesn't like to factor in sleeps into her plan.
I have heard that from last time, so we're hoping we can get some more sleeps into this time.
Yeah, you can talk to Sue about that.
Yeah.
You know, crew can be quite sort of manipulative too. You can say, look, it's not asleep. You're just closing your eyes for a minute. You're not sitting. We're just taping your feet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just close your eyes and visualize good times.
I feel like I'm giving away trade secrets here, Rob.
Yeah, been there.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that there's a lot to be said for when things are getting really hard for a runner to really adopt that team part of it, in that that's the point at which I will say, we just have to get to the next post, or we just have to get to the next aid station. Like, I'm here with you. I'm not going anywhere. You know, we're in this together. It's your race, but I'm going to get you through the next 5K. And I think that can have a really positive impact on a person. It just boosts them. They're not so, they're alone, but they're not.
Yeah. You did that to me. It worked.
Yeah. Or just changing up things that you think you can't change. So, you know, like people will often have a walk-run approach, or an approach where they're going to use the poles for a certain period of time or at a particular time, but not otherwise. And just mixing that, saying, okay, well, instead of doing 3 minutes on and 2 minutes off, let's switch it up and go 2 and 3, and it's a diversion for the person, and it's enough to make them think that they're doing something different, and something different can sometimes mentally translate into just a burst of energy.
Rachel, who couldn't join us tonight, but she had a question, and she was going to ask what to do if your runner goes off script. Yeah, so they've given you a script of I'm going to run this pace or whatever, and if they get out there and they're running a minute a K faster than they should be.
Yeah. If people are running slower, I'm not normally that concerned about it. But if they're running faster, that can be a concern. And I just call them out on it and say, we agreed beforehand that you're going to run at this pace and not go faster than that. And remember, our reason for that was because if you run at this pace here, we're not even halfway and we don't know how much we're going to have left in the tank. And if we find that we've got not enough left in the tank, it's going to be too late to change it. So let's wind it back now. And if you feel really good in another couple of hours, well then, yep, let's go for broke. But let's wind it back now. And I'm a total hard ass with that stuff. It's like, what are you doing? This is not in the plan.
I have a.
Yeah, sorry, go for it.
I have a race later this year where I'm going to be travelling to the race, but the crew will be staying in Perth, and it's a sort of virtual crew. Liz, any good ideas for how to manage that one?
Oh, that's interesting. I've never
Obviously,
done that.
I have to pop my own blisters.
Yeah, you have to pop your own blisters. I've never done it, so I couldn't say from personal experience, but I would say that in a situation like that, it'd be even more important to have a lot of conversations up front and probably even more communication during the race than if you were running alongside somebody or seeing somebody at every, checkpoint. Because they're not going to be able to read your mind. Whereas with lots of runners who you're crewing for, as soon as you see their face, you can just tell how they're traveling. You can just tell how that's going. So, yeah, I think that would be the only advice I could give, not having done it.
Thank you.
Go you.
Louise, we need a coffee date.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing that we haven't touched on, and which I think is really important, particularly when people have other people crewing for them who they may not know particularly well, or they're not specially intimate with, or they haven't trained with much. But, people have lots of stuff happen to them, and blisters are mild, but, people have a lot of gastro issues, and, they might have, toilet issues that they can be sort of really embarrassed about. And I think it's really worth talking to your crew beforehand about things like, well, do we have Ziploc bags and toilet paper and everything in little things ready to go in case that stuff happens? And also, if that does happen, that might be quite sort of embarrassing at the time, but we have this agreement that that's the sort of stuff that what happens on the trail stays on the trail. We don't need to talk about that stuff in the pub afterwards, unless you're, a Sean type person who likes talking about that stuff in the pub afterwards. But a lot of people
do know we're runners, Liz.
I do.
That's dinner conversation.
But some are more private than others about stuff like that, and that can be something that makes people very anxious pre-event. It's like, Pam, for example, she has a very weak stomach and she will normally throw up a lot in every single event she does. She doesn't care about it. It doesn't bother her. She just throws up and keeps running. But for other people, I've known people who have taken medication to stop themselves from throwing up, and that's caused all manner of other problems with their stomachs. And it's all around, I don't want somebody to see that bit of me. And I think that, you really need to be quite out there with people in advance. And I normally say to people I'm crewing for, I'm a mother. I've done nappies, vomit. I've done everything. Nothing that's going to happen to you in your bodily functions is going to surprise me or disgust me. And I'm not going to talk about it afterwards.
It's just lucky Gary's gone, because I'm going to get him to put pseudo cream on my balls. What? That's what crew's for. I'm not doing it myself. I'll be too delirious. So when it happens, and it will happen, don't tell Gary, but he's getting down there. I don't know how he does it. He can use what he wants to use, but he will be putting Sudocrem on my balls.
Normally when I've
Sorry.
crewed with somebody who's also got their partners with them, I say, now this is where I get to delegate, and that's your job.
Don't tell Gary I said that. It'll be a little surprise later on in the race, probably maybe Saturday.
I don't think I'll be getting my girls to do that.
Well,
That'd be a little.
I'll get, if you want, Nick, I'll send Gary over to your place. Sometimes
that'd be good.
He'll be trained by then, won't he, Kev?
I have a question. For Delirious, I had to be an emergency pacer with literally for Darlene with only a few hours notice because our other pacer rang me and said, oh, I can't go on, can you take over? And it was an overnight section from 10 o'clock at night till 10 the next morning. I mean, I know Darlene as a friend, but I never paced her before, and she was tired, so I couldn't really ask her what she wanted from me as a pacer. But any advice on how to kind of read people, or I found it hard to, do I keep talking to her, do I not talk, and trying to get her to stay motivated.
Yeah, so that's happened to me a couple of times where I've sort of been called in at the last minute for, you know, somebody else. So, you know, the runner that I've been with, you know, has DNF'd or whatever, and somebody said, oh, great, can you come and crew for this other person because they're shorter person? I think I would just be really overt and say, look, you know, I've never crewed for you. I don't know you really well. I'm just going to take the cues from you. You run as fast, as slow as you want, and I'll go with you. And if you want to start walking, then I'll walk. And tell me if you would like me to talk more or less, because, you know, if talking is going to help lift you or distract you, then I'm happy to do it. But if you'd prefer me to just shut up, then I'm fine with that as well. Yeah, I mean, really, I just think the more open and transparent you can be, the better. And that means essentially as a crew person, if you don't already have one, you've got to develop a thick skin, because there'll be times where someone says, you're halfway through a long story that they've asked you to tell them, and then they say, shut up, I'm over it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it worked out well in this instance, but just for future.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it worked out well, good enough. She had a dirt nap lying on me, so I was at least a good mattress for her.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the reasons that keeps us coming back as crew people is that the experience can just be so bonding. You know, people who I've crewed for, I might only see once a year, but I just feel like we don't even have to say certain things to each other. There's just this real connection there because we experience this really tough but really wonderful time. And it's not like war stories. We don't have to keep telling each other that we did that. It's just unspoken, but it's very, very bonding.
Just with the, sorry, I apologise. My phone's, I can only get the camera facing the other way. And I think the answer is going to be yes, it's okay. But I've just, the thought of just keep myself company is to have someone, a friend of mine, so from Manjimup, that's can do like, you know, 50 or 60, 80 kilometres or whatever it is. And then a friend from Albany that's then going to be able to do another 80 kilometres with me the other way. Like I said, I think the answer is yes. So is there any recommendations or any further advice about doing something like that?
No, I think that's great. I mean, if that's what you've teed up with them and they're both good to go over those distances, then I think that's good for everybody. And also then you have built in for yourself and for them the expectation that that's going to be the changeover point. And for you as the runner, it gives you something to look forward to. It's sort of like, you know, when the second runner comes in, it's like the sun rising, you know, it's like, that's going to be a new lease on life because I've got a new crew person. I mean, it's a great strategy.
Liz, when a runner starts to get to that point where they're talking, pulling out, what strategies do you have in place there if you still feel they've got quite a bit left?
Yeah, so that's a really tricky one. I will normally say to people a couple of different things, or I've got a couple of different strategies. Normally I will start by saying, how about we just go another kilometre and then have that conversation? Like, let's just sit with that for a minute. I know that's how you're feeling right now, but you know that even on a 5K training run, you can feel like that. So how about we just go another K and see how you're feeling? Other strategies that I would adopt are, you've come this far. Are you absolutely certain that you don't want to finish it off? And before you answer that question, have a think about how you're going to feel when you wake up tomorrow morning if you don't finish. But at the end of the day, the decision is actually theirs. And so I'll do what I can to help them keep their head in it, whether that's postponing the decision to pull or getting to them to think forwards around, are you going to hate yourself in the morning if you pull out and you wake up in the hotel room and everybody else is going to the awards breakfast? Are you going to hate yourself? But at the end of the day, if they are completely depleted or they're hurting so much that it's starting to do damage, then it is their call and it's their race. It's not my race. But I'll certainly do some hard conversations to be sure that they're sure, or to see if they're sure enough.
Right. Okay, we've probably got time for one more question. Does anybody have another one? Otherwise, I've got one ready to go. Anybody? Right. This one was from Jackie, who also I don't think's been able to make it. But she asked about how do you get your runner to eat?
Yep, this is really important. And I've crewed for a couple of people, and I was really interested in the Lucy session that you did, and also I think it was with Sarah, who talked about particularly for women around body image and stuff like that. And I've crewed for a couple of women who have, taken all sorts of appetite suppressants and stuff so that, they don't have to, or they don't feel like they have to eat, just not realizing that it just doesn't work like that in an ultra. And my approach to that is that it's the same as sticking on pace. It's the same as saying that, when the sun starts to go down at 4 o'clock, we're going to take off all of the wet, sweaty stuff and put on the warm stuff. It's the same as, you've got to have a certain amount of fluid because you know that whether you're thirsty or whether you're not, as soon as you get below a certain point, your performance is going to deteriorate. It's part of the recipe, and you have to eat. And on occasions with some people, and I have to say, sadly, and I'd be the first to put my hand up and say, in my younger years, I had eating disorder issues as well. And I have to say that one of the things that I think has actually saved me from that in my middle and older age is that now I'm routinized with eating. And so I don't ask myself the question, do I want to eat this or do I not want to eat this? It's that I have lunch at 1 o'clock and these are the things that, in my head I'm comfortable eating because, they're healthy and they're not going to make me gain too much weight or lose too much weight. And I approach crewing for someone who's got that sort of mindset the same way, and that is it's a formula. And if you're not going to follow the formula, I'm the wrong person to crew for you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Liz. No, that was absolutely brilliant. Just like to say to everybody who hasn't done major crewing before, if you ever do have the opportunity, or if somebody is looking for volunteers, please say yes. Like crewing is absolutely as much fun as running. And well, Liz attests to that, given the amount of crewing that she's done. But it's an amazing experience, and you get to form some really close, lifelong friendships, which is just incredible. And as well as that, I think you learn more crewing than you will ever get by reading books or watching videos on YouTube. Like crewing is such a learning experience in terms of what goes on. So before you think about crewing for a 200 miler, running a 200 miler, maybe go and crew one first. see what goes on. It's a great experience. All right. Thanks very much, Liz.
No worries. I wish you all well. Run well, guys.